in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, happy 2015. Welcome to our first webcast of the year. My name is Christine Dursey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of APA Ohio and Vice Chair of the New Urbanism Division. Today is Friday, January 16th, and we will be hearing the presentation Water Quality and Quantity. This is a two-part series. Part 1 is today, Part 2 is next Friday, and it is sponsored by the Florida chapter. For technical help during today's webcast, just type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, or you can call the 1-800 number shown. And for content questions related to the presentation, type those in the questions box also located in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen. And we will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. And as I said, today's webcast is sponsored by the Florida chapter. To learn more about all of our chapters, visit planning.org/chapters. And to learn about our divisions, planning.org/divisions. Coming up on your screen is a list of our upcoming webcasts. To register for these, visit utah-apa.org/webcasts. To log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, visit planning.org, go to your dashboard, Activities by Provider. Select the Florida chapter sponsoring today's webcast, and then select today's webcast title. This webcast, I believe, has been approved for 1.5 CM credits. It still might be pending, and it is available for live viewing only. Some recorded webcasts are available for distance education. For availability of distance education, check our webcast webpage at utah-apa.org/webcasts. And to note, we do have new distance education webcasts already listed. We have an ethics session, we have a law session, and then just a regular session worth 1.5 CM credits. So be sure to check out the webcast webpage to view those and get your CM credits. Of course, like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on our upcoming sessions. And we are recording today's webcast. It will be available on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube. And you can request a PDF of the PowerPoint by emailing planningwebcasts@yahoo.com. I'd now like to introduce the moderator for today's webcast, who will then jumpstart our program. Our moderator today is David Childs. David is a partner with the governmental law firm of Hopping Green and Sams. He represents businesses and local governments before the Florida Legislature and regulatory agencies on issues related to water policy. David has represented clients in the drafting and passage of several major environmental laws, including legislation governing numeric nutrient water quality criteria development, the reuse of reclaimed water, water quality credit trading, and recreational boating. So with that, I'll turn it over to David, who will introduce the rest of our speakers and get the program started. David.
Okay, thanks, Christine. I'll introduce our illustrious panel we have here today. First up is going to be Eric Draper, who is the Executive Director of Audubon, Florida, which is certainly one of the state's most influential conservation groups. Audubon owns Florida's premier ecotourism destination, Corkscrew Sanctuary, as well as a number of other conservation lands and science and nature centers. Eric's a Florida native. He's a career conservationist. Previously, he was National Audubon Senior Vice President for Policy and Staff Director for the Florida House of Representatives Majority Office. He's also currently serving on EPA's Environmental Finance Advisory Committee. It serves on the boards of Sustainable Florida and the Florida the Florida Ocean Alliance. Eric's really going to be focusing on a recent constitutional amendment here in the state of Florida, Amendment 1, the Water and Land Legacy Amendment, which I think will be of interest to those inside and outside of Florida, certainly. Then after Eric is completed, then Tom Frick will be up, and he is currently the director of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection Division of Environmental Assessment and Restoration. This is the state agency and the state division that is responsible for implementing the Florida Watershed Restoration Act and the Clean Water Act in the state of Florida. So this would include setting water quality standards, monitoring and assessing surface water quality, establishing TMDLs and restoration goals. So it really runs the gamut of water quality work here in the state and water quality regulation. And he'll be talking about that work and some of its relationship to planning issues. Tiffany Busby will then follow, and Tiffany is the president of Wildwood Consulting, which has been around for now about 15 years, and she really focuses on providing project management and facilitation services to solve complex environmental problems. Through this work, Tiffany and her firm have supported large-scale water quality restoration efforts as well as trails development. Tiffany is also a board member for the Florida Stormwater Association and the past legislative and government relations chairs for that organization. She's spoken to address the National Academy of Sciences on issues related to TMDL and is a regular speaker on management plans, numeric nutrient criteria, water quality, credit trading. Tiffany is going to be focusing on some of the implementation of the programs that Tom Frick is going to provide the overview of, so the total maximum daily load basin management action planning process here in the state of Florida. And then after she's done, then Catherine Bray will be up, and Catherine Bray is the planning chief for water quality enhancement with the city of Tallahassee. And she is a Eckerd College graduate and has a bachelor's in marine science and has been working in really focusing on stormwater management with the city of Tallahassee for 15 years, though she has over 24 years of experience in water quality, sampling research, and compliance issues. She is going to be looking at really a specific issue as far as kind of another subset with the water quality restoration and focusing on some septic tank issues, kind of wastewater treatment, stormwater, and the various issues that arise when you are restoring water bodies. Again, so I think that we have a really great panel. I think it's going to be a great expenditure of everyone's time learning about these issues. And with that, I will kick it over to Eric, and he will begin. Thank you.
Eric, are you there? Eric, we can't hear you. Can you be sure to unmute yourself?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we're good to go. Thank you.
Yes, we can, Eric.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry for the delay. Okay, so I'm Eric Draper. I'm the Executive Director of Audubon, Florida, and I'm really glad to have the opportunity to do that. I'm sorry for my rough start here. I'm going to focus mostly on money for water infrastructure. I'll tell you a story first about myself as a way of introduction. I am a career conservationist, but very early in my career in the 1980s, I worked in lobbying for a organization up in Washington, D.C. We just helped to get the Superfund reauthorized in 1986. In 1987, Ronald Reagan vetoed the Clean Water Act, and I had the opportunity, actually, I got invited to the White House when he vetoed the Clean Water Act. It was kind of funny. I thought that I didn't even know why I was going over there. I was kind of this scruffy public interest activist. But I never forget the words that he said when he vetoed the bill. He said, I asked Congress to send me a bill to clean up the nation's waters. This was, by the way, the amendments to the Clean Water Act, 1987 amendments. And he said, instead they sent me this budget buster. Well, I concluded right there that my future as an environmental advocate was going to be focused on appropriations rather than on policy. For one thing, it's easier for me to understand numbers than policy. But the other thing is I realized the real fight over clean water in our country has been less about standards and water quality limits and more about financing, because you really can't get things fixed unless you figure out how to pay for them. So I moved forward to Florida at this point, having worked on a number of multi-billion-dollar programs at the state and federal level to finance things, and sit on the Environmental Protection Agency's Environmental Finance Advisory Committee, which is a FACA committee. And I just helped to bring about in the state of Florida a remarkable victory, which was I'm trying to move my slides here, which was a $22 billion dedication of funding for water and land conservation. It was the largest voter-approved amount of money in the country on the 2014 ballot. And it also was approved by 75% of Florida voters. So why in the world, in a beautiful state like Florida, would the voter, which with such a strong history of conservation, would the voters feel like they needed to go out and vote to dedicate a source of taxes to generate a $22 billion fund? Well, here's the problem, is that we've had a history of water-related disasters unfolding in Florida over the last couple of decades. First of all, we had Everglades. Everglades was a world-class ecosystem which has been significantly damaged by the twin effects of drainage on and around the wetlands that make up the Everglades, and a heavy amount of farming activity, particularly sugarcane farming, which significantly delivered a large amount of phosphorus nutrient into the natural Everglades. The combination of the loss of the natural water flow into the Everglades and the water quality problem led to a series of state initiatives to approve Everglades restoration. Well, the combination of the water quality plans for the Everglades, which are now targeted to cost about $3 billion, and we're about halfway through that, along with delivering the fresh water flow, which are now targeted to cost upwards of $15 billion, put the state of Florida in an entirely different position in terms of financing environmental restoration. Close on the heels of the Everglades problem is the drainage system that begins in Orlando and flows down through the peninsula of Florida into Lake Okeechobee and into the Everglades and out toward coastal estuaries. And there we have a highly overdrained landscape dominated by agricultural activities and increasing amount of urban stormwater that then Governor Jeb Bush kind of called out and said, we're going to have to spend a significant amount of money on trying to deal with the water quality problems that are being created by this lake. And we had our first numeric standard set for Lake Okeechobee, and it was set almost 15 years ago at at 40 parts per billion, or about 125 metric tons of phosphorus coming into the, 140 metric tons of phosphorus coming into the lake, 115 from human sources. Well, at that time, there were upwards of 750 tons of phosphorus coming into the lake, and the watershed itself was receiving about 5,000 tons of human sources of phosphorus. So we saw that this was in a very low nutrient system, which is Florida, that we were heading for a disaster. The question, though, is how do you get at that? Do you regulate your way out of it? And I think that Tom and David are probably going to talk about the BMAP programs later. We do have a BMAP now in Lake Okeechobee. Or do you spin your way to create treatment firms? But again, another multi-billion-dollar problem that the state of Florida was faced. Then the third leg of this problem happened when people started realizing that there was something wrong with Florida's amazing, beautiful spring shed system in central and north Florida. Our springs, as a natural phenomenon, rival the Grand Canyon, the most first magnitude springs of any place in the world. Beautiful things that most of us that are Florida natives just have taken for granted forever, that you can go and you can dive into a spring and see down 50 feet the most remarkable blue system. Again, a huge, huge cost. Well, that came to the forefront in the state of Florida last year when a legislator introduced a bill to deal with the spring system and focused on the replacement of septic tanks that were affecting some of the springs in central Florida, and pulled out of the air a price tag for doing that at $350 million in the first year, from a source of money that we, the rest of the environmental community, had already targeted through this constitutional amendment for spending specifically on a combination of Everglades, land conservation programs, parks, trails, and water restoration strategies. So that caused us to take a serious look at how much of the state's environmental spending needs to go into water quality infrastructure. This is going to then jump in. I'm going to start showing you some slides here. One of the things that I looked at, because I wondered why this legislator was going to spend $350 million from the same source of funding that we're getting out of the we're earmarking in the Constitution, which is the real estate transfer tax. So well, I'll take a look at what the state of Florida is already doing. So I went to the source that actually I was involved in. You know, when helping to override Ronald Reagan's veto of the Clean Water Act back in 1987, part of that was the state revolving fund, which was a grant system from the federal government to the state government, $80 of federal money matched by $20 of state money, and that is built up to be quite a significant sense. So the slide that I'm showing you right now is basically the plan of how that money is used in the state of Florida. You can see from the chart, I hope you can see the chart, that a significant amount of that is used for advanced treatment, wastewater. Some of it is used for sewer treatment rehabilitation. Some is used for new collection system, and then some is actually going into to stormwater systems. So the state of Florida has a significant investment, and the federal government has a significant investment in spending in the state of Florida, and this is just a roll-up of how funds have been spent so far from this particular Clean Water Fund. But what we actually know about financing in the state of Florida for wastewater is, although some particularly large urban governments have done a fairly good job, I will call out the Tampa Bay area, for instance, has done a good job of dealing with their wastewater problems. And in some sense have done an adequate job of dealing with their stormwater problems. Florida is actually falling behind the job of financing stormwater and wastewater infrastructure, along with all the other improvements that need to be done to make sure that we meet our water quality goals, which I'm sure that David will talk about a little bit later. Those estimates have varied. It's almost hard to get your head around what some of those costs are. but certainly it's not unreasonable to think that there's $50 billion of unplanned need for financing in the state of Florida. And I say that before we even got into the place of having the new numeric nutrient criteria, which will be implemented through our total maximum daily load program, before we got to the place of having an increased appetite for Everglades spending, before we decided that the Lake Okeechobee Best Management Action Plan, which is the cleanup plan, is going to have additional costs, or even before we got into that spring system. So Florida is looking at a very, very expensive long-term set of obligations for dealing with our water quality problems. Well, that was not exactly what we anticipated when we began our petition drive 2 years ago to collect enough signatures to put Amendment 1 on the ballot. Amendment 1, also called the Water and Land Conservation Amendment, was a proposal to take 1/3 of our real estate transfer tax. It was initiated because 4 years ago, at the point of the recession, but also at a point in political change in Florida government, essentially the legislature and the governor stopped spending money on land conservation and on the Everglades, which were priorities that had existed for a long time and where we had always enjoyed a fairly liberal response from the state legislature in terms of funding. We realized, looking over the horizon, we were not going to be able to depend on the legislature to fund these things, so we went to the ballot. We collected 1 million signatures, and by this time last year, we were busy campaigning to win the vote in the November 4th election, which we did. We not only won the vote, but we showed overwhelmingly that people support land and water conservation. In fact, there were only 2 counties that didn't offer up, of Florida 67 counties, that didn't offer up a majority vote, and in many cases, counties voted as much as 80% to approve the new constitutional amendment awarding the money. So where we find ourselves now is in this place of having, over a 20-year period, a $20 billion fund, a $22 billion fund, which will be spent on land and water conservation. And as environmental advocates, we suddenly find ourselves in the odd position of finding that a constituency that was not particularly active during the referenda campaign has emerged, which is the local governments that say, well, improving wastewater systems and stormwater systems certainly counts as ecosystem or environmental restoration. So therefore, a significant portion of this money, which have been raised around the idea of parks and beaches, a significant part of that money would be spent on water quality issues. So thus that leads to a discussion between the people that are interested in protecting the springs, and of course that's got a wastewater septic tank component to it. People dealing with the estuaries, where we've got hundreds of thousands of septic tanks putting nitrogen into our coastal estuaries, and other places. So the point that we get to right now is asking the question, which is, has Florida, absent the fact that the voters just put $22 billion into a 20-year fund to help to deal with things, has Florida actually thought through what our total costs are for stormwater and wastewater, and do we have a coherent plan for prioritizing where we would spend state dollars? And have we really asked the question, which is, what is the relative responsibility between local sources of spending for wastewater and stormwater and state level spending? A lot of the septic tank systems I referred to are kind of stranded systems. They were built after local governments allowed housing developments to be built with septic tanks rather than be hooked up to central sewer. It was a cheaper way for the developers to do it. And a lot of the people that are on these septic tanks are saying to their legislators, like, if you want me off the septic tank, you're going to have to completely pay to get me off the septic tank. Not the tradition in the state of Florida, but that's kind of the political debate that's going on there right now. So what I, as the chair of the legislative committee for the Amendment 1 sponsors who have now started reaching out to people and basically asking the question at the political level and with other constituencies is, okay, right now, instead of just going to Amendment 1 and taking those dollars and diverting them over to wastewater and stormwater projects, right now is a time for us to have a much larger conversation about what the costs are for dealing with Florida's water quality problems, to bring the local governments to the table and say, you know, this is mostly a local government problem. This is mostly a problem that local government is going to have to figure out how to pay for. There is a state role to play in it, but the state role to play in those wastewater things should in fact be an incentivizing, prioritizing, and targeting role. So one thing that everyone needs to pay attention to is that wastewater spending, stormwater spending is really a matter, it's not a pay-as-you-go situation. It makes the most sense to spread the cost of this over the largest group of people that we possibly can. So one thing that Congress did last summer was they extended the term of the state revolving fund bonds from a 20-year term to a 30-year term, and they also created some other incentives to make it easier to use borrowing as a way to do it. Well, here's the thing. I'm showing you a chart right now that shows there's a distinctive difference in the cost of borrowing money when it's borrowed through the state revolving fund versus borrowed through the open market. But what we need to do right now is get everybody together and figure out the way to lower the cost of borrowing to local governments so that they can afford right now to put the major capital investments that need to be made into stormwater and wastewater systems so that we can in fact get about the business of meeting our water quality problems. I think that I've run through a complicated discussion. I hope that I haven't used too much of my time. I'm going to sign off right now. My name is Eric Draper. My email address is edraper@audubon.org. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. And now I'm going to hand this over, I think, to David.
Okay, and I'm going to immediately pass the mic over to Tom Frick, who now will transition from the financing and the money to the policy discussion.
All right, hopefully everybody can hear me. I will get my screen up here. So Eric did an excellent job of outlining, some of the challenges here in not only in the state of Florida, but specifically, but anywhere, especially when it comes to environmental issues and restoration. And so for my presentation, I'm going to outline regulatorily how we go about restoration nationwide through the Clean Water Act, but specifically also here in the state of Florida. And then I'll talk a little bit of the issues that Eric mentioned about springs and kind of set the table for why that's important. Again, my name is Tom Frick. I'm the director for the Division of Environmental Assessment and Restoration here at the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And as part of my charge, I lead the division that deals with restoration in the state. I'm sure this will move. All right, I'm trying to get the slides to work here. But most of restoration these days, when folks think of cleaning up waters, I think in the 70s and early 80s, at the early stages of the Clean Water Act, we were looking at mainly point sources. So these are the facilities, industrial facilities, things like that, that had pipes that were discharging directly into waters. And over a few decades, that effort has largely...
I'm going to interrupt you.
Largely been successful.
If I might, Tom, you got it going. Okay. I was just going to try to help you figure out how to move your slide forward. Go ahead.
I think it was a computer problem. It was just lagging. But largely dealing with those efforts with point sources, as they're called, we're successful. We've gotten them under control and deal with those through a permitting process. Then the issues become dealing with, as I'll call it, people loving the area too much, or non-point sources of pollution. And this is coming from, from our daily lives. And so that's part of the restoration framework that we're working on currently, and this deals a lot with nutrients. And you'll hear a lot about nutrient systems, and Eric mentioned about us setting standards 15 years ago or so for Lake Okeechobee, and then having moved forward in Florida and developed those in the late 2000s. So the Clean Water Act really sets out the framework for us, which is states, and this is all states, must set water quality standards. So those are those standards for nutrients, therefore bacteria, mercury, other toxics, metals, things like that. Then states are responsible to monitor the water quality, to assess that water quality against those water quality standards, and establish which water bodies are not meeting their water quality standards. Once we've determined which ones are not, and those are called impaired waters, once we've determined that, then we have to establish restoration goals for those. And that's what, as folks have heard, probably the four-letter word TMDL, or total maximum daily loads. This is really, as part of the restoration process, has been what's driving a lot of the environmental issues nationally as well as within Florida. As I mentioned, the point sources have been, for the most part, dealt with, and they're a part of a TMDL, but that non-point source is also part of a TMDL. And so that issue, that TMDL, really sort of drives environmentally, economically, et cetera, what can be done in a watershed. So once a restoration goal or a TMDL is set, then you have to implement that. You have to find a way to achieve that TMDL, that restoration. And in the cycle, one would put together a plan. You would put together projects to reach that load reduction, and then continue to measure your water body until you've achieved successes. In Florida, we do that through what's known as the Watershed Restoration Act. We've been working on this since the late 90s. 1999 was when it was established in Florida and amended in the mid-2000s. And this Restoration Act really sets out a number of things in Florida. It tells us in state law, that how to go about looking at total maximum daily loads, those restoration goals, and then also establishes how we're going to restore our water bodies. And that's through a planning process, an implementation process as well, for projects called Basin Management Action Plans. And these are unique to Florida. You won't find BMAPs labeled that way in other states, but though some other states have analogous activities. But really, in Florida, our restoration plans, it requires good science. So as we mentioned before, that we need to make sure that we're identifying waters that have problems based on good science. And we do that through what's known as our impaired waters rule, or how we identify impaired waters. And then also using good science and good information to develop our restoration goals, or our TMDLs, and also specifics in our Basin Management Action Plans. As a part of this, also, we're required to have significant public participation, since, as I mentioned, this is not just affecting point sources or companies, but it's also going to impact individuals and also county and local governments. Public participation is required, and that is at all steps, when we're identifying what water bodies are impaired, when we're developing our TMDLs, and then also our restoration goals. All are required to have public participation. All are required to go through a formal process of adoption that can be challenged by any group, and which assures us that we're developing these not only with good science and good information, but that we also have significant buy-in to those programs. So what is a TMDL? You've probably heard this a number of times. As I mentioned, it's a restoration goal. It really just the formal definition is up here. It's the maximum amount of a pollutant, nutrients, nitrogen, for example, that a water body can receive and still meet the water quality standards. So it can receive an amount and still be healthy. Really, when we look at it informally, it's a numeric water quality goal to restore some sort of water body back to a healthy system. And I'll put these numbers or these letters down at the bottom. This isn't alphabet soup. It's just to identify the fact that all TMDLs not only have this WLA, or waste load allocation, which is the point source, but they also have the LA, which is which is a load allocation, which is the non-point source component that I've been speaking about. And then also there's a requirement for a margin of safety, so we know that we're restoring that water body. But it's important to understand TMDLs affect both point source, permitted folks, and then also folks that don't have a permit. That's under the load allocation. And so in Florida, the way we deal with the load allocation side of things is through our BMAP process. And as I mentioned before, we're really, this is a very collaborative process. It brings a lot of things together. We go through and do some very refined source identification, trying to determine where the sources are coming from. We try and allocate responsibility to entities to come up with restoration projects. So everybody has an allocation or what they need to do, how much they need to reduce, and then they come up with projects in order to meet that reduction goal. Through the BMAPs, we also do water quality monitoring. We're assessing how well we're doing to try and achieve our goals and how well these projects are doing in the environment. And they also are required commitments for funding and implementation timelines. And one of the things that's unique to Florida is our BMAPs, our restoration goals, are adopted through a secretarial order, and those timelines and projects are enforceable. In other words, we all agree that this is what we're going to do, and then we hold everybody to that. And we also are monitoring in place to make sure that we're getting there in the water body. So how big of an issue is this? Just in Florida alone, on the left side you can see as far as impaired water segments. For nutrients alone, we have nearly 700. There's 3,800 impaired segments throughout the state, which is significant, impaired for one reason or another. We've adopted and we focus on nutrient total maximum daily loads. We have 382 of those. I'll make a note where you see the fourth line down or third line down that talks about mercury. There were 1,179 impaired segments. We did one TMDL that's statewide that covers all 1,179 water segments. So our TMDLs will cover multiple water segments. And then as we implement those TMDLs, our Basin Management Action Plans, those also will cover multiple TMDLs in an individual BMAP. So at present, we have 382 formally adopted TMDLs in Florida and 20 Basin Management Action Plans. To give you an idea, when we were talking about spring systems, Eric brought this up, we have right now 347 spring systems that are captured under our total maximum daily loads, and also in our BMAPs, 81 separate spring systems that are captured under our BMAPs. So a significant number of those larger ones, we have set a restoration goal and are also moving forward with restoration plans. So just looking at statewide a coverage of what it looks like, the watersheds for those 20 adopted Basin Management Action Plans, what parts of the state we're working in. You can see here the darker ones are the adopted. We formally adopted these. We also have another set of BMAPs that we are in development on. This is for adopted BMAPs. We've covered nearly 10 million acres in the state of Florida, and if you look at where those are, if you're in Florida, you'll notice those are significant areas, urban areas where people are located. If you're outside of Florida, you know, that's a significant amount of the state to be under a BMAP. So about 1/3 of it is in a restoration plan at the current moment. One of the conversations that Eric brought up was on restoring our springs, and I think as we move forward in the TMDL and restoration world, the interactions between surface water and groundwater are unique and you know, can be significant. And so as in Florida, I always tell people that the difference between groundwater and surface water is just a matter of time. And we have a lot of water that percolates into the groundwater, and then it comes up out of our springs. In other areas, it's also used significantly for drinking water. But through the years, and we've seen problems with some of our spring systems. And we've added nutrients to those to the point that a number of our springs and then their spring runs have become impaired. And you can see these timelines that over the years that the nutrients, nitrogen, in each one of these spring systems has been steadily increasing for a significant period of time. Just to give you an example of the complexity of trying to restore these systems is not every spring system is the same, just like not every watershed is the same. And so, for example, we have in the Santa Fe Basin, this is in north central Florida, north of Orlando, a little north of Gainesville, Florida, if you know where that is, and pretty much due west of Jacksonville, is a surface water system, two large rivers, the Santa Fe River and the Suwannee River. The Suwannee coming in from the upper left, Santa Fe moving along the center there. Each one of those dots is a spring that's emerging, where groundwater is emerging into the system. And these water bodies really are driven by groundwater. That's what is contributing to these. This area is impaired. We identified that, and we've put together restoration plans dealing with that. Now, in this area, if you notice a lot of this, you'll see that this is a very rural setting, a lot of agricultural in this area. And so our plans and our efforts need to engage agriculture in how to reduce the nutrients that are being lost to the environment. And Florida is unique in that the Florida Watershed Restoration Act I mentioned earlier does identify specific things that agriculture needs to do. And so we are required to engage agriculture in our restoration efforts. And agriculture is also required to either show that they are not causing a problem individually, or that they have to do some best management practices in order to limit the amount of nutrients that are lost to the environment. And so that is, you know, that is a significant thing that's different in our restoration efforts in other places in the United States. Also, this map, it's not all agriculture driven. There's a number of areas where the urban setting is a significant contribution. And here we're looking at Silver Springs, which is in the center of Florida, near Ocala, Florida, just north of Orlando. And to put on here, the spring system is right in the middle of here, the blue dots that I'm pointing at. You'll notice that there's a wastewater treatment facility very close. All of this area is on very porous sand that has a direct connection to the aquifer. And then all of these, which are individual purple dots, are on-site sewage treatment disposal systems or septic tanks. And as you can see, there's a significant amount of those in the area. There's also this gray, which is all the urban area, where you'll have runoff from urban commercial areas, and obviously in the areas with the septic tank, you'll have fertilizer runoff from homes. So it's very complicated in restoration. Tiffany Busby will be talking about some of the specific tools that we use here in Florida to try and restore these waters, and I will change over to her as the presenter now.
Okay, thanks, Tom. And also, if anyone has any questions about the subject matter of the presentations, we're on track to maybe have a few minutes at the end of the presentation, so go ahead and get those in. We'll get them in the queue and answer as many as we can. Thanks. Take it away, Tiffany.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. I've had the good luck and the good fortune to be working on the restoration plans with Tom and his staff at the Department of Environmental Protection for almost 15 years now. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about how that works and why we do it. So I know Tom talked about the Clean Water Act and the legislative imperative that goes into our total maximum daily load program. But there's also the context of that, of why are we restoring water quality and what are our goals. And the state system is set up so that depending on the water body, they have to meet particular standards depending on their uses. So we are trying to restore water quality for recreational uses. And of course, here we use our beaches, rivers, and lakes a lot for recreation. There are also public health considerations that are always important. We have a lot of fishing both in our marine and fresh waters here. We have shell fishing areas, and particularly consumption of those is a public health issue. We do use some of our surface waters for drinking water supply. Right now, most of our drinking water does come from the aquifer, from the groundwater system, but there are some surface waters used as drinking water. And as Tom mentioned, we do have now nitrogen problems in some of our groundwater systems in springs, so that's a concern. Also, agriculture uses our surface waters as water supply for irrigation, so that's important as for our food source, as well as agriculture is a major part of our economics in the state. We also are concerned about the actual health of the aquatic ecosystems, and that those are great places for our flora and fauna to live. And also, it's important to mention Florida tourism is a very important aspect of our state economy, so the condition of our waters really does matter to our visitors and therefore to our local economies. The tools that we use, we do, as our previous speaker mentioned, a big one that we have used in order to restore waters is to look at wastewater upgrades. And these can take on a couple different aspects. So probably the most obvious one is just to improve the level of treatment that a wastewater treatment facility provides. And here I'm talking about mostly domestic wastewater facilities that take household waste and treat it. But it can also, we've also dealt with industrial and commercial settings as well in their treatment before the water is discharged. We've also seen that some folks find that improving the collection system can lead to water quality improvements in their discharge. So this means the actual lines that go out into neighborhoods or commercial areas and direct that wastewater from the place where they're generated back to the plant. So those can lead to great improvements in the quality of water that's discharged. We've also seen that actually changing the way that the water is discharged can lead to water quality improvements. Here in Florida, we've had a lot of focus lately in terms of redirecting wastewater to additional uses, so basically recycling the water. More and more areas are installing pipes so that wastewater can be directed and used for irrigation, so we're not using potable water to water our lawns. And they're also just changing the way water is disposed. We do have land application of wastewater here in Florida, as well as direct discharges to surface water, but changing the volume and how they're discharged can lead to water quality improvements. Tom mentioned, I think, septic tank systems, and in some of our spring systems in particular, where we have urban areas near the spring system and areas where there's a very direct connection between the ground, the surface water of the land and the groundwater system, is to redirect septic tank system effluent that percolates down and gets into the groundwater and then comes up nearby that isn't as clean as we would like, is to redirect those septic tanks to a wastewater treatment system. So putting those areas on sewer and treating that water to a higher level than the septic tank system is able to achieve. In springs areas, we've looked at improving the quality of the treated water, particularly that's land applied if it's got a direct connection to groundwater and the water that we're concerned about that's coming out of the springs, and also to improve or reduce contributions from septic tank systems into the groundwater, like I mentioned earlier. So wastewater is an important part of our toolbox, particularly since it's something that we can measure, and because of our engineering expertise, it's something that we really have a lot of control over. Other tools that we use deal with urban stormwater improvements. We talked about, Tom mentioned earlier that urban stormwater is a big part of our nutrient issues in Florida, as well as some of our bacteria issues, and we need to treat that in order to achieve our water quality goals. So one of the things that we do is we retrofit older urban areas and add stormwater treatment to that stormwater before it goes into our surface waters. We have had rules in place for over 20 years now in Florida that requires some treatment of stormwater, but in areas that were developed before that, they may not have any treatment in place. For areas that already do have some stormwater treatment, we found some benefit to adding additional treatment or enhancements to those systems to improve how well those systems improve the water quality. Also, we like to try to control pollution sources. Generally, what we find is it's a lot cheaper and easier to stop the pollution from getting into the stormwater rather than trying to clean it up after it's there. So we actually have a lot of local governments in particular that have significant public education programs to try to teach homeowners and residents about the impacts that their activities have on water quality. We also have more and more low-impact development techniques and ordinances that are encouraging development or redevelopment to retain more water and improve the water quality before it leaves the site. And then ordinances, we do promote the use of ordinances on such as limiting fertilizer use, limiting the amount of irrigation that goes on, so it limits then the volume of stormwater that leaves the site and goes into the stormwater system and out to surface waters. To use landscaping that doesn't require as much fertilizer and irrigation, so that those things aren't needed. To promote control of pet waste, so that doesn't enter the system, and to promote low-impact design uses. There's a picture there of the city of Palm Bay, which is on the Indian River Lagoon, and a public education program where they're talking to folks about the use of fertilizer. Another big tool we use, and Tom mentioned that, is reducing runoff from agriculture. We do have a lot of agriculture in Florida, different kinds depending on where you are in the state. If the water body is impaired in that area, they are required to implement best management practices that are appropriate for the kind of crops that they use. If they don't do that, they're required to perform water quality monitoring to show that they're not causing a problem. So most of them find that the best thing to do is to actually implement the best management practices. And we do hear that a lot of them are doing some of those things anyway, if not all of them, but to make sure that they're doing them in the right places and taking full advantage of those. We also have manuals in Florida that are adopted by the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services that also outline some advanced management practices that are available, and sometimes there is funding available to implement those. And also, we've seen some implementation of some regional treatment facilities that treat water from a variety of farms and treat that before it's discharged to surface waters. And there are a number of sources of cost share funding in Florida, and we use those to fund projects directly with landowners. And the pictures you see here are in the St. Johns River Basin, some examples of some fertilizer banding equipment that locates the fertilizer right at the plant roots. It dramatically decreases the amount of fertilizer that is needed, and which decreases the cost to the grower, and also means that there's less fertilizer leaving the site. Also, some irrigation drip tape, which again directs the water right at the plant roots, means that a lot less water needs to be used. It also saves the grower money because they don't have to run their pumps as much, and keeps the water, controls the water levels in the fields. So Tom outlined for us Florida's overall restoration approach. In general, we like to develop a specific plan of how we're going to go about achieving our water quality standards. The way our program is structured, we engage at the local level because almost all the activities take place by local entities, whether they be public or private sector organizations. We outline the management actions that are needed in order to improve water quality. As Tom mentioned, if they're adopted into a BMAP, they do become enforceable. The statute requires that we're fair and equitable in terms of our expectations of the pollutant sources and the organizations that are involved. Every BMAP or restoration plan has a monitoring plan, so we're measuring our progress and how we're doing. We do include information about funding, and some of the programs that Tom's agency has gives extra points for their grant programs if you have an impaired water and particularly a restoration plan in place. And then there's also a cycle where we review and update the plans so that we're being responsive if they're working or the work is done or there's more work that needs to happen. So Tom talked about the basin management action plans. They are specific to an area, so we do describe what that is. They can implement one or more of the total maximum daily load. Sometimes we have, for example, nitrogen and phosphorus impairment, so we can certainly incorporate more than one impairment in a basin management action plan if it's in that same geographic area. We describe the actions or the projects, as you will, that are going to reduce the pollutants that we're concerned with. We include timelines for projects and estimates of those reductions where they can be calculated. As I mentioned, they include a monitoring plan, so we can measure whether the plan is working or not. And as we talked about, they are enforceable through various permits or through the BMAP itself. An example of a basin management action plan is Lake Jessup. Lake Jessup is located in central Florida, kind of near Orlando, those of you who are familiar with that. It includes cities of Lake Mary, Winter Springs, counties such as Seminole and Orange. It's a very urban-suburban watershed. It also has some agriculture on it. The BMAP area includes the lake and its tributaries, and it focuses on reducing the nutrient phosphorus. The picture there shows the surface of Lake Jessup where someone has taken their finger and written the words Jessup in an algal bloom there. It does have has a lot of problems with algal blooms. This shows a map of the Lake Jessup watershed, and the different colors show the different cities. So you can see there are a lot of local government entities that are stakeholders in this watershed, as well as agriculture and some other folks. So all of them were involved in the basin management action plan process. And here's some examples of some things that they have done. Castleberry's street sweeper, an overhead shot of Lake Mary's rain garden, and major drainage improvements the city of Maitland conducted. We also do have some other types of plans that we use where particularly locals can be proactive and initiate their own planning process, particularly for water bodies that the water quality is getting worse, or water bodies that are already considered impaired but don't have a TMDL in place yet. If we have a plan that has a TMDL, we call that a BMAP, but we can certainly start planning and restoring before a TMDL is in place as well. So one of those kinds of plans is called a reasonable assurance plan. It's a lot like a BMAP, but it doesn't have a TMDL in place. It sets water quality targets and a project schedule, much like a basin management action plan would do. And some examples of places we have reasonable assurance plans are the Florida Keys and the Tampa Bay area. We also have another option, which is we call a 4E plan, which is just a code that we use. But it's a lot like a BMAP, but it's more of a restoration process where we know we have some things underway, and we want to show that we're making progress and that we may meet water quality standards with the projects we have underway. While those things are going on, it postpones the development of the state's TMDLs, and then we monitor the water quality and see if we can get the water body restored without a TMDL. We have some examples of that, and our next speaker, Catherine Bray, has done one for a drainage ditch in the city of Tallahassee, a large ditch, and also a lake in the Osceola County, Kissimmee area, which is in central Florida. And the department also provides some planning assistance for these types of plans to help folks be proactive with their water quality. As Tom mentioned, in all these kinds of plans, local engagement is not just encouraged but required. So we do our best to engage the entities that either are responsible for pollution or can help us with restoration efforts, folks like local governments, regional entities, industrial sources, certainly agriculture and their representatives, the utilities or wastewater plants in the area, as well as environmental groups and just local residents. And we have some participants in almost every BMAP in all those categories. In terms of, I know you all are planners, so overall, in our case, planners can certainly engage in the process of those plans and provide input and ideas on how we can achieve our water quality standards, to know your water bodies and their issues so that we have ideas on the best way to restore them, to promote thinking about issues during redevelopment where there are opportunities to say where roads are being dug up to redo the stormwater system or think about the best way to implement projects, to promote policies and ordinances that reduce pollution sources, to promote, if you've got local government clients or employers, to promote them to apply for state funding, and just to ask questions so we can help you and know what's going on. So that's the end of my presentation. So I'm going to try to turn it over to Catherine Bray with the City of Tallahassee. She's got a lot of experience with restoration planning at the local level. Catherine?
Hello, hello. Get this going here. Hello, everybody. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. This has been a great transition of the bigger picture down to a very specific example. I'm going to speak to you about the Upper Wakulla River and specifically Wakulla Springs. I'm going to talk a little bit about the problem, the background and history, and what we've done for restoration, and what we still need to do and how to rethink for the future. So to get your bearings here for Florida and orient you, City of Tallahassee is up in the Panhandle, and the purple county is Leon County, where Tallahassee is situated. The water body that we're talking about is in the county south of us, Wakulla County. And Wakulla Springs, see my page down isn't working. There we go. Wakulla Springs is a first magnitude spring. The discharge is about 260 to 400 million gallons per day. It's crystal clear water for most of the time that comes out of that spring. There's riverboat rides, and when the clarity is greater than 75 feet, they have glass bottom boat tours. The cave system underneath the lodge over here, you can fit a jet airliner in that cave system. The Creature of the Black Lagoon was filmed there. Tarzan movies were filmed there. And although this picture is not me, I did have this experience this summer. Early one morning, only two of us in the swimming area, and a manatee came in, and we were face to face with the manatee. It was quite magical. The ecosystem here is near pristine, other than obviously some water quality issues that have arisen over the years. So to zoom in a little closer, Tallahassee in Leon County sits high up on the red clay hills, and then the southern portion of the county, there's a geological feature called the Cody Scarp that falls off to a flat area. That is an ancient shoreline from the interglacial periods, and as you fall off to that, the Florida aquifer and our karst geology underneath is very susceptible to human activities and our nitrogen loading on the ground surface, and directly impacts Wakulla Springs. The flow through this aquifer system is about 800 cubic feet per second. That's equivalent to over 780 Olympic-sized swimming pools moving beneath us, every second. So what is the problem? Tom showed those graphs, so it's great. I don't have those graphs to show you, but our nitrate concentration slowly started increasing from the late 80s and into the 90s. It resulted in algae smothering the native plants there and hydrilla taking over. And that's due, the nitrate comes from wastewater sources and fertilizer sources, as Tiffany also pointed out. So in 2012, there was a total maximum daily load goal established, the TMDL concentration of 0.35 milligrams per liter. That's also our new Springs state standard now. And at that time, with the data that was used for that assessment, we had a 56% reduction. Since then, with the improvements you'll see that we've already done towards restoration, I think those numbers are coming down. Just to give you an idea of the comparison, though, the drinking water standard for nitrate is 10 milligrams per liter. That's what protects public health. But to protect the health of a spring ecosystem, we need at least 0.35 milligrams per liter. So as Tom also mentioned, there's a lot of science and data that gets us to this point and then keeps us going after that point. And we had early studies that showed connections from our spray field, our wastewater treatment facility. First of all, I'll go here to the left. This is the spring shed for Wakulla Springs, which is right here. It reaches all the way up into Georgia. So, groundwater moves down from Georgia to Wakulla Springs and onward to the Gulf of Mexico. Oops, I already passed. I don't know how to go back up. But their dye tracer studies showed a connection from the spray field to Wakulla Spring, where dye was injected directly into the aquifer, and in about 2 months' time, it traveled 12 miles to Wakulla Springs, and there was an indication of a connection. So our mayor is quoted as saying, if we're part of the problem, we're going to be part of the solution. And the city of Tallahassee and its residents are now paying for a $250 million upgrade to our advanced wastewater treatment facility. That's a spray field, a 2,000-acre field where we apply 17 million gallons per day of wastewater from about 170,000 residents. And to give you an idea, so we're trying to meet our permit requirement of 3 milligrams per liter. We're actually below that. And a septic system output from the drain field is anywhere from 20 to 40 milligrams per liter of nitrogen. So our footprint is much smaller now. And we embarked on this project in 2008. So over 6 years, we went from 12 milligrams per liter down to 3 milligrams per liter. And Eric also talked about the funding for this. So it was good to note that this fairly small town of Tallahassee were paying this $227 million project. We've achieved our goals. We've been under permit requirements all along, and we're actually at about 1.27 milligrams per liter now. So we're very proud of that. To put this in terms of pie charts, again, more studies that were conducted. Before the advanced wastewater treatment upgrade, our wastewater treatment facility was 50% of the pie. That's the loading, from nitrogen loading that reaches Wakulla Springs. We were 50% of that loading. Another 21% were septic systems. And then the small slices of the pie were other sources such as fertilizer and livestock. Those are all sources that are in that area south of that Cody Scarp, so in that flat area that's vulnerable to the aquifer. This blue slice is everything up on the hill north of the Cody Scarp, so really it is all the sources combined. It could be divvied up into smaller pieces. After our upgrade and the lag time for groundwater to respond and reach Wakulla Springs, it's been predicted that our slice of the pie will now shrink to about 19%. But with growth, of course, over time growth and the septic system still being installed as is, their loading is going to be 33%. So now they are the largest contributor. And if you turn that pie chart into a bar chart, again, our loading in kilograms per year went from 111,000 down to 30,000 post-AWT. But if you add the red line of where do we need to be and what is our goal, if you convert that 0.35 milligrams per liter into a loading amount, you'll see that even after the wastewater treatment plant upgrade, we haven't met our goal, it won't be enough, and the best bang for our buck and easiest source to address is our septic systems, although they may not be easy with some of the other hurdles like political and funding obstacles. So we exceeded our that 52% reduction. Okay, so jump back before 2012, and again, with the science behind us, there were aquifer vulnerability studies done statewide as well as our two counties here in Leon and Wakulla. This is Leon County, and again, it was demonstrated that that Cody Scarp is an area of high aquifer vulnerability. And because of that, our planning department moved forward with a Wakulla initiative to change our comprehensive plan. And we made amendments that had a whole component for the restoration of and protection of Wakulla Springs. What was included in that was establishing that central sewer is the preferred method of sewage treatment in areas that were already, high development or urban service area, an urban fringe, and then also require those performance-based septic systems that Tiffany mentioned that are nutrient reducing, they're not just conventional, and other low-impact development requirements. Because of that, this planning department received a statewide award in 2009 for that initiative. So we adopted that the Wakulla Springs, and in that area that was red and green, that's now a primary springs protection zone. Wakulla County also has comprehensive plan policies for performance-based septic systems. The little catch is Wakulla County implements those right now. They're currently doing those things through their comp plan. With Leon County, we implement our comp plan through ordinances, and those ordinances have not been passed yet. So we're in a little bit of a slowdown with that process there. Just to give you an idea, currently statewide legislation has restrictions where if you're not already grandfathered in with those comp plan requirements, right now you cannot require performance-based septic systems, for the purpose of reducing nutrients. It's only for public health issues and failing septic systems. So the current problems that we're dealing with right now, again, we're zooming into the area below the Cody Scarp and a little bit into Wakulla County. This is Wakulla Springs at the bottom of the triangle. Our primary focus area is really looking at about 8,600 septic systems that need addressing. This is our spray field here. Now, Eric mentioned other places statewide have literally tens of thousands of septic systems that need addressing. We have 8,600. Now, a total number of septic systems for Leon and Wakulla County is about 50,000 in those two counties. So back in 2011, the three governments, City of Tallahassee, Leon, and Wakulla County, jointly funded a study to look at the management of the septic systems. And some of the recommendations that came out of that, of course, were where feasible, connect to the city sewer system or the Wakulla County sewer system. There's a small one down there. And then in other places, use advanced wastewater treatment cluster systems. And this picture on the left shows how where that would be applicable. These small, densely developed areas would be great candidates for an advanced wastewater treatment cluster system, otherwise known as a package plant. All these yellow dots are septic systems. And of course, out here where it's more sparsely populated, the preferred method would be to just upgrade the individual systems. And this is an area in Wakulla County, that's all septic systems. And so obviously that would be a good candidate for connecting to central sewer. So what does this mean in terms of numbers, tying back into Eric's talk about funding? The cost, the OSTDS is septic systems, the cost to connect septic systems to central sewer, including building the sewer, is about $15,000 to $20,000 per parcel. That Lombardo report that we refer to it, the study that was done for the management of those systems, also shows that upgrading an individual septic system to the performance base is anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000. So if you just look at those 8,600 times 20,000, you're talking $172 million. That's not too far away from our $227 million. Now, I recently did speak to a local engineer who claims he can retrofit for $5,000, but even then, that's $43 million. So where is this going to come from? Because there is no utility that manages septic systems right now. There's been talk of developing what they call an RME, a responsible management entity, but the county permits development, the Department of Health permits the installation of the septic system, and then the homeowner owns the septic system. So there's no entity yet. So where could you get the money? Well, this, again, Eric touched on this. The city residents, for our upgrade, I'm a city resident, we had an average of a $12 increase in our fee. It was a 50% increase in our fee. The average wastewater fee is now $36. If those values were applied to all 8,000 plus tanks in the Springs Protection Zone, you would have a bonding capacity of anywhere from 22 to 66 million. If you actually applied that fee and the concept of everybody who contributes a wastewater load pays, then you have a bonding capacity and a revenue stream for up to $380 million. So let's go back to those regulations that Tom and Tiffany were talking about. We have the TMDL, we had the studies, we proceeded on with the advanced wastewater treatment upgrade. In 2013, we stepped into the Basin Management Action Plan. And so we knew so much coming into this, and stakeholders met for a year. And of course, what we wanted to talk about was the elephant in the room, the septic systems. They are the next low-hanging fruit towards restoration. They're what are needed to move forward and meet that goal, that red line that I showed you. We hope that this BMAP process is that extra push that will get us past some of those hurdles that we talked about. So what do we still need to do? Well, Tiffany mentioned this, part of the planning and your job with as planners is to reach out to your local and state water resource professionals. Find out about your water bodies nearby or even 12 or 15 miles away to see if you have an effect and what you can do. And participate and support local wastewater policies that promote nitrogen or pollution reduction. And we truly believe that we need to have a paradigm shift and that all wastewater contributors need to pay their fair share. For our situation in Florida, we also have 2 different state agencies that we're working more and more that they can cooperate and collaborate more because we have the regulations coming down from one state agency, and then the big issue with septic tanks is run by another state agency. So there's a disconnect there. And lastly, I think the technology is there. It can be done. Those cluster systems and the performance-based systems, they're out there and they can be done. And the last little plug that I'll give you is much more entertaining and only 5-minute video. If you Google environmental crossroads and Wakulla Springs, you'll get to this video here that explains our situation. And we did that so that we can educate the viewers and the general public on this really kind of complex issue of wastewater and groundwater and springs protection, so that when these policy changes come forward, our general public will be more willing to accept those policy changes. And so with that, I'm going to hand this back over to David Childs for hopefully a little bit of time for questions.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. Great job to you and to all of our panelists. I did not actually receive any questions, except for some technical questions, people having trouble with audio, etc., but it looks like those got worked out. So unless one pops up here in the next couple of seconds, I'm just going to thank all of you for dialing in and thank our presenters for giving a very informative overview of water quality, regulatory, and financing issues, and how the TMDL program works in Florida, really from a top to bottom approach, really getting good and detailed there at the end. So I know everyone had a lot of information thrown at you. You have in front of you now the contact information for everyone that participated today. I'd encourage you, if you have questions, to shoot an email or dial one of these very experienced folks that presented today. So with that, I will now turn it over to Christine, and we can sign off, and thanks everyone for participating.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and thanks David. Of course, now we're starting to get some questions in, so please go ahead and just direct those to whoever would be most appropriate. I just want to remind everyone that you can request a copy of the PDF. Just simply email that request to me, planningwebcast@yahoo.com. And again, thanks everyone, and thanks to the Florida chapter for sponsoring today's webcast. Remember to like us on like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive all of those, all the up-to-date information and sessions. And we look forward to part 2 of this water quality series next Friday. So everyone, thanks a lot and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.